The first time Gabrielle Burrows saw her father's gaze darken with that familiar desperation, she knew the evening would end in ruin. The amber light of oil lamps cast long shadows across the saloon as William Burrows pushed forward the deed to their small ranch, the last thing of value they owned in Reno, Nevada in the summer of 1878. "Papa, please," Gabrielle whispered, her fingers digging into the worn fabric of her father's sleeve. At 22, she had weathered many storms alongside him, but never had she seen such madness in his eyes. "We can find another way." William shrugged her off, the stench of whiskey following the movement. "Just one more hand, Gabby. Fortune's about to turn." But fortune had abandoned William Burrows long ago, deserting him the same day consumption had claimed his wife 5 years earlier. Since then, he had chased luck from saloon to saloon across the Nevada territory, dragging Gabrielle with him as their circumstances grew increasingly dire. Across the table sat Silas Harmon, a cattle baron whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his wealth. His cold eyes flicked between Gabrielle and the deed, a calculating smile spreading across his face. "Perhaps," Harmon drawled, pushing back the deed with one finger, "you might offer a more interesting wager, Burrows." The silence that followed hung heavy as desert heat. William's bloodshot eyes darted to his daughter, then back to Harmon. "What do you mean?" William asked, though the way his voice cracked suggested he already knew. "Your daughter. One hand. If you win, I'll give you $500 and clear your debts to me. If you lose—" Harmon's gaze slid to Gabrielle, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "She comes to work for me, permanently." "Papa," Gabrielle gasped, but the words died in her throat as she watched her father consider the offer. The realization that he was truly contemplating gambling her away like livestock struck her with physical force. "500, you say?" William mumbled, fingers twitching toward the cards. "William Burrows." A commanding voice cut through the haze of smoke and desperation. All heads turned to see York Newcomb standing at the edge of the table. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, the young rancher's presence seemed to fill the cramped saloon. At 27, York had built a reputation as one of the most respected cattlemen in the territory, honest, hardworking, and fair. "This has gone far enough," York said, his gaze fixed on William. "You're drunk, Burrows. Go home." William scoffed. "Mind your business, Newcomb. This is between me and Harmon. When you start gambling with people's lives, it becomes everybody's business." York's eyes met Gabrielle's briefly, and she saw something there beyond mere concern, a quiet understanding that made her heart flutter despite the circumstances. Harmon leaned back in his chair, amused. "Well, well, the Honorable York Newcomb. Come to save the damsel, have you? Perhaps you'd like to join our game instead." A tense silence followed as York considered the man. Gabrielle had known York since they were children, though they had grown apart as adults. She'd watched from afar as he'd built his ranch after his father died, admiring his determination even as her own life had spiraled into chaos. "I don't gamble," York finally said. "Not with cards, anyway." "Pity." Harmon turned his attention back to William. "What'll it be, Burrows? One hand. Your daughter against $500. Before William could respond, York placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Get up, William. I'm taking you home. Take your hands off me." William shrugged away, sending a half-empty whiskey glass toppling. "I know what I'm doing." "You clearly don't," York replied, his voice hardening. "Think of your daughter." But William's mind was clouded by alcohol and the tantalizing promise of enough money to start fresh. "Deal the cards," he told Harmon, refusing to meet Gabrielle's horrified gaze. Gabrielle felt the world tilt beneath her. "Papa, no, you can't do this." "Quiet, girl," William muttered. "One hand. Just one hand and all our troubles are over." Harmon's smile widened as he shuffled the deck with practiced precision. Poker, 5-card draw, simple enough for a drunk. York's jaw tightened as he looked to Gabrielle, whose face had drained of color. "This isn't legal," he said, but his words fell on deaf ears as the cards were dealt. William picked up his hand, a flicker of hope crossing his face as he arranged the cards. Gabrielle stood frozen, unable to believe this was happening. Her entire future balanced on 5 playing cards in her father's trembling hands. "I'll take 2, William said, discarding from his hand. Harmon nodded, dealing him 2 new cards before taking just one for himself. "Your bet, Burrows." William looked at his new cards and a smile spread across his face. "Raid 'em and weep." He laid down his hand, 3 kings and 2 queens. Full house. For one breathless moment, Gabrielle allowed herself to hope. William reached for the money, laughing with relief. Then Harmon placed his cards on the table one by one. The 10, Jack, Queen, King, and Ace of Spades. "Royal flush," he announced, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Bad luck, Burrows." The color drained from William's face. "No, that's not. You cheated." "Careful with your accusations," Harmon warned, his hand moving subtly toward his gun. "A deal's a deal. The girl comes with me tonight." "No." York's voice was steel. He stepped between Harmon and Gabrielle. "This wasn't a legal wager. You can't claim a person as property." Harmon's eyes narrowed. "The law's a long way from here, Newcomb, and I won fair and square." "Fair?" York scoffed. "Nothing about this is fair." Gabrielle felt her heart pounding against her ribs as the 2 men faced off. The saloon had gone quiet, spectators watching the drama unfold with morbid fascination. "I won't go with you," she said, finding her voice at last. "My father had no right to wager me like I'm cattle." Harmon stood slowly, revealing his impressive height. "Your father made a debt. In these parts, debts are honored, or there are consequences." His gaze shifted to William, who had slumped in his chair, the realization of what he'd done finally breaking through his drunken haze. "What kind of man bets on another human being?" York asked, disgust evident in his voice. "The kind who understands value," Harmon replied. "And that girl has value to me. My wife died last winter. I need someone to keep my house, among other things." The implication hung in the air, causing Gabrielle's stomach to churn. "I have a counter-offer," York said suddenly. Harmon raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "A competition. Tomorrow at noon. If I win, the girl goes free, debt cleared. If you win, you get my north pasture, 300 acres of the best grazing land in the territory." Whispers rippled through the saloon. Everyone knew the value of York's north pasture. It had the most reliable water source outside of the river. "What kind of competition?" Harmon asked, clearly intrigued. "Riding and shooting. 3 events. Best 2 out of 3 wins." Harmon considered this, his eyes calculating. "And if I refuse?" "Then everyone here witnesses you backing down from a fair challenge," York said. "Not good for a man of your reputation." The tension in the room was palpable as Harmon weighed his options. Finally, he extended his hand. "Deal. Tomorrow at noon at the crossroads. Bring witnesses." York shook his hand firmly. "Count on it." As Harmon gathered his winnings and left, the spell over the saloon broke. Conversations resumed, though many glances were still cast in their direction. Gabrielle turned to her father, who sat staring at his empty hands. "How could you?" she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "How could you bet your own daughter?" William couldn't meet her eyes. "I was sure I'd win, Gabby. I was so sure." "Go home, William," York said, his voice gentler than before. "Sleep it off. We'll sort this out tomorrow." As William staggered to his feet and shuffled toward the door, Gabrielle remained rooted to the spot, the full weight of what had just occurred crashing down upon her. He was going to let that monster take me, she said, more to herself than to York. York's expression softened as he looked at her. I won't let that happen. Why would you stake your land for me? She asked, searching his face for answers. That pasture is the heart of your ranch. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Some things are worth more than land, Gabrielle. She hadn't heard him say her full name in years, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her breath catch. What if you lose tomorrow? She asked. I won't, he replied with quiet confidence. But if I do, I'd rather lose land than know I stood by while a good woman was treated like property. He hesitated, then added, We should get you home. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Gabrielle felt both terrified and strangely hopeful. Tomorrow would determine her fate, but at least now she had a champion. Thank you, she said softly as they walked toward her father's small cabin on the edge of town. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. York glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. There's nothing to repay. I'm just doing what any decent man would do. But as they walked side by side under the vast Nevada sky, Gabrielle knew there was nothing ordinary about York Newcomb or what he was risking for her. The morning dawned clear and hot, the sun rising over the eastern mountains with unforgiving brightness. Gabrielle had barely slept, her father's snores from the next room a constant reminder of his betrayal. When she finally rose, she found William sitting at their small kitchen table, head in hands. Gabby, he began as she entered, his voice hoarse. What I did last night, save it, she interrupted, unable to look at him. I don't want to hear your excuses. I never thought I'd lose, he said anyway. I was so sure. Gabrielle slammed a cup down on the table. You were willing to gamble me away, your own daughter, William flinched. I'll make it right. How? She demanded. York Newcomb is risking his best land to clean up your mess. What are you risking? Her father had no answer. Years of drinking and gambling had stripped away the man she once knew, the loving father who had taught her to ride and shoot, who had read to her mother during her final days. That man was gone, replaced by this hollow shell who would bet his daughter's freedom on a hand of cards. A knock at the door saved William from having to respond. York stood outside, already dressed for the day's events in a simple blue shirt and worn denim pants, his gun belt slung low on his hips. Morning, he said, his eyes finding Gabrielle's immediately. I brought you something. He held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Gabrielle accepted it hesitantly, unwrapping it to reveal a gleaming silver pendant on a leather cord. What is this? It was my mother's, he explained. She always said it brought her luck. I thought you might need some today. The simple kindness threatened to unravel her carefully maintained composure. I can't take this. Just for today, he insisted. Consider it a loan. Their fingers brushed as she took the necklace, sending an unexpected warmth through her. Thank you, she murmured, slipping it over her head. The pendant felt cool against her skin. York turned to William, his expression hardening slightly. People are gathering at the crossroads. Word spread fast. William nodded, looking decades older than he had just days before. I'll be there. You'd better, York replied evenly. You owe her that much. As they walked toward the crossroads where the events would take place, Gabrielle found herself studying York from the corner of her eye. The morning sun highlighted the strong line of his jaw, the slight curl of his dark hair at the nape of his neck. She had always thought him handsome, even when they were younger, but there was something more compelling about him now, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from within. Are you afraid? She asked suddenly. York considered the question. Not of the competition. Harmon's a decent rider and shot, but I've been working cattle my whole life. What are you afraid of then? His eyes met hers briefly. That he won't honor the agreement if he loses. The realization chilled her, Of course Harmon might renege men like him often did. What happens then? Then we have a different kind of problem, York said grimly, his hand brushing the pistol at his hip. They arrived at the crossroads to find what seemed like half the town already gathered. A makeshift course had been set up, with barrels and targets placed at various distances. Harmon stood with a group of his ranch hands, looking confident in a tailored black vest and white shirt that seemed impractical for the dusty work ahead. "Newcomb," he called as they approached, "was beginning to think you'd changed your mind, and missed the chance to see you lose." "Never," York replied, his voice level despite the tension evident in his shoulders. The town's blacksmith, a burly man named Jenkins who often served as an unofficial adjudicator in local disputes, stepped forward. "I'll be judging today's events," he announced. "We've got 3 challenges: riding, shooting from horseback, and quick draw. Best 2 out of 3 wins." He looked between the 2 men. "Are the terms clear? If Newcomb wins, the Burrows girl is free of any obligation to Harmon. If Harmon wins, Newcomb's north pasture becomes Harmon property." Both men nodded their agreement. "First event is riding," Jenkins continued. "You'll each take a turn on that wild Mustang we caught last week. Whoever stays on longest wins." Gabrielle's eyes widened as she spotted the horse in question, a fierce-looking buckskin stallion currently testing the strength of the corral fence with powerful kicks. "Who goes first?" York asked. Harmon pulled a coin from his pocket. "Call it heads." The coin spun in the air, catching the sunlight before landing in Harmon's palm. "Tails, I'll go second." York nodded, removing his gun belt and handing it to Gabrielle. Their eyes met briefly as she took it, the weight of the weapon surprisingly heavy in her hands. "Be careful," she whispered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." York approached the corral where several men were struggling to hold the Mustang still enough to saddle. The horse's eyes rolled white with fear and anger, its powerful body twisting against the restraints. "Easy, boy," York murmured as he approached. He moved slowly, letting the horse see him, speaking in that same calm, steady voice. "I know you're scared. This won't take long." To Gabrielle's surprise, the Mustang settled slightly at York's approach, though it still trembled with nervous energy. York checked the saddle, then nodded to the men holding the animal. "Ready when you are," he told Jenkins. Jenkins raised his hand. "Timer starts when he's in the saddle. Needs to stay on for at least 8 seconds to count." York swung onto the horse's back in one fluid motion. For a split second, the Mustang froze, as if in shock, then exploded into action. The animal bucked and twisted with breathtaking violence, all 4 hooves leaving the ground at once before slamming back down. York moved with the horse, his body flowing with each jarring motion, one hand raised above his head for balance. Gabrielle counted the seconds silently, her heart in her throat. 5, 6, 7. The Mustang changed tactics, spinning rapidly before leaping straight up and coming down with bone-jarring force. But still York stayed on, his face a mask of concentration. 8 seconds, Jenkins called. "He's qualified." But York didn't dismount. The Mustang continued its frenzied bucking, and he continued riding, his movements becoming almost balletic in their precision. 10 seconds, someone shouted. 12, 15. Finally, at 17 seconds, York chose his moment and dismounted with grace, landing lightly on his feet as the Mustang continued to buck around the corral. The crowd erupted in cheers. Harmon's face darkened as York walked back, dust covering his clothes but a satisfied smile on his face. 17 seconds, Jenkins announced. "Beat that, Harmon." Harmon handed his hat to one of his men and approached the corral. The Mustang was still wild-eyed, though somewhat tired from its efforts with York. Unlike York's gentle approach, Harmon strode directly to the animal, his movements sharp and commanding. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, checking the saddle before mounting in one swift movement. The Mustang reacted instantly, perhaps even more violently than before. Harmon's style was entirely different from York's, where York had moved with the horse. Harmon fought against it, yanking on the reins and digging his spurs into the animal's flanks. 5 seconds, Jenkins called. The Mustang twisted sharply to the right, then reversed direction. Harmon lurched sideways, barely managing to stay on. 6, 7. With a tremendous heave, the Mustang arched its back and kicked both hind legs high in the air. Harmon flew forward, scrambling for purchase, but momentum carried him over the horse's head. He hit the ground with a dull thud, rolling away just in time to avoid the Mustang's flailing hooves. 7.5 seconds, Jenkins announced. Newcomb wins the first event. Gabrielle couldn't help the smile that spread across her face as York accepted his gun belt back from her. "1 down," she whispered. 2 to go, he cautioned, though she could see the confidence in his eyes. The second event was shooting from horseback. 6 targets were set up at varying distances, and the competitors would ride at a gallop, firing as they passed. This time, Harmon went first. He mounted his own horse, a sleek black stallion that pranced nervously under him. At Jenkins' signal, he set off at a gallop, drawing his pistol as he approached the first target. Bang! The first target splintered as Harmon's bullet struck just off center. Bang! The second shot was better, hitting dead center. Bang! Bang! 2 more hits, though not perfectly centered. Bang! A miss, the bullet kicking up dust behind the 5th target. Bang! The final shot struck the edge of the 6th target, barely counting as a hit. 4 hits, 1 center shot, Jenkins called as Harmon circled back, frustration evident on his face. York mounted his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that stood calmly as he settled into the saddle. He checked his pistol, then nodded to Jenkins. At the signal, he urged his horse forward, building quickly to a smooth, controlled gallop. As they approached the first target, York raised his pistol with practiced ease. Bang! The first target shattered, the bullet striking dead center. Bang! The second shot was equally precise. Bang! Bang! 2 more perfect shots, drawing murmurs of appreciation from the crowd. As he approached the 5th target, York's horse shied slightly at something on the ground, a deliberate distraction. Gabrielle realized, as she spotted one of Harmon's men quickly stepping back from the course. York adjusted instantly, steadying his mount with his knees while maintaining his aim. Bang! Despite the interference, his 5th shot struck true. For the final target, York executed a move that drew gasps from the crowd. Instead of firing straight on, he twisted in the saddle, firing backward as he passed the target. Bang! The bullet struck dead center with seemingly impossible precision. 6 hits, 6 center shots, Jenkins announced as York returned, a ripple of excited chatter passing through the onlookers. Newcomb wins the second event and the competition, Harmon's face contorted with rage. "The quick draw is still to come," he protested. "We agreed on 3 events. Best 2 out of 3, Jenkins reminded him. "Newcomb's already won 2, the competition is over." For a moment, Gabrielle feared Harmon might reach for his gun. His hands twitched at his sides and his men shifted restlessly behind him. But with so many witnesses, he seemed to think better of it. "Fine," he spat, turning his glare to York. "You've won. The girl's debt is cleared." His eyes shifted to Gabrielle, malice clear in his gaze. "Remember, girl, it was your father who wagered you away. Not even Newcomb's skill can erase that shame." With those parting words, he stormed off, his men following close behind. The crowd began to disperse, many stopping to congratulate York on his victory. William approached hesitantly, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. "I don't know what to say," he mumbled. "There's nothing to say," Gabrielle replied coldly. "You've lost everything, our ranch, our savings, and now my respect." William flinched as if struck. "Gabby, please." "No," she cut him off. "I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you destroy yourself and try to take me down with you." She took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm despite the storm of emotions within her. "I'm leaving, Papa. I don't know where I'll go, but I can't stay here with you." Gabby, but she had already turned away, walking toward York, who stood a respectful distance away, pretending not to listen. "Thank you," she said when she reached him, her voice steadier than she felt. "You saved me today." "You're welcome," he replied simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "What will you do now?" Gabrielle glanced back at her father, who stood alone, shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't know. Find work somewhere, I suppose. Start over." York seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, "I could use help at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to get married. The position's yours if you want it." Hope flared briefly before caution tamped it down. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity," he assured her. "It's honest work for fair pay. You'd have your own cabin, meals, and Sundays off. And," he added with a hint of a smile, "I promise never to gamble you away at cards." Despite everything, Gabrielle found herself smiling back. "When you put it that way, Mr. Newcomb, how could I refuse?" As they walked toward his ranch, the silver pendant warm against her skin, Gabrielle felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of a new beginning. The first weeks at York's ranch passed in a blur of activity as Gabrielle settled into her new role. Far from being mere charity, the position of housekeeper was demanding work, cooking for York and his 4 ranch hands, maintaining the main house, and helping with various chores around the property. But unlike the desperate struggle of recent years with her father, this work had purpose and dignity. Her cabin, a small but solid structure behind the main house, became a sanctuary. For the first time in her adult life, she had a space that was truly her own, free from the chaos of her father's gambling and drinking. She took pride in making it homey, hanging curtains she sewed herself and arranging wildflowers in a jar by the window. York proved to be a fair employer, never demanding more than was reasonable and always expressing appreciation for her efforts. He was often busy with the ranch, leaving before dawn and returning after dark, but their paths crossed at mealtimes and occasionally in the evenings when he would sit on his porch, sometimes inviting her to join him as they watched the sunset paint the Nevada sky in brilliant oranges and purples. On one such evening, about a month after she'd arrived, Gabrielle brought coffee out to the porch where York sat, his long legs stretched out before him. "Still wearing my mother's pendant, I see," he observed as she handed him the steaming mug. Gabrielle's hand flew to the silver piece that hung around her neck. "I'm sorry, I forgot I still had it. You said it was just a loan for the day of the competition." She began to lift the cord over her head. "I'll return it right away." "No," York said quickly, his hand reaching out to stop her. His fingers brushed against hers, and that same unexpected warmth coursed through her. "Keep it. It suits you." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Gabrielle was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him, of the warmth of his hand still touching hers. "Thank you," she finally managed, letting the pendant fall back against her chest. "It means a lot to me." York withdrew his hand, but his eyes remained on hers. "How are you settling in, Gabrielle, truly?" The question seemed to hold more weight than casual inquiry. "Well," she replied honestly, "better than I'd hoped, it feels." She searched for the right word, "safe here." Something flickered in his expression. "I'm glad to hear that. A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee, watching the day's final light fade from the mountains. "Have you heard from your father?" York asked eventually. Gabrielle tensed slightly. "No. Last I heard, he'd moved on to Carson City. Looking for better luck, I suppose." York nodded, his expression unreadable. "Some men spend their whole lives chasing luck instead of making it. And you?" she asked, genuinely curious. "What are you chasing, York Newcomb?" The question seemed to surprise him. He considered it for a long moment, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "A legacy, I suppose," he finally answered. "Something worth leaving behind. My father built this ranch from nothing. I want to build on what he started, make it something that lasts." "Is that why you risked your best pasture for me?" The question had been nagging at her for weeks. "Because it was the right thing to do." York turned to her then, his gaze intense. "That was part of it. And the other part?" She pressed, her heart suddenly beating faster. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. They both turned to see a rider approaching at speed, kicking up dust in the twilight. York stood, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun he wasn't currently wearing. As the rider drew closer, Gabrielle recognized Jim Carter, one of York's ranch hands who'd been in town for supplies. "Mr. Newcomb," Jim called, reining in his horse. "Trouble in town. Harmon's men are saying he's coming for you tomorrow, something about the competition being rigged." York's expression hardened. "Did they specify how it was supposedly rigged?" Jim shook his head. "Just drunk talk, mostly, but they seemed serious about Harmon coming out here to settle things, as they put it." Gabrielle felt cold fear spreading through her chest. "He can't possibly think he has any claim over me still." "It's not about you, Miss Burrows," Jim said, glancing uncomfortably between them. "Word is, he's more upset about being shown up in front of the whole town. Says his reputation's been damaged." "His pride's been damaged," York corrected. "His reputation was already what it was." He turned to Gabrielle. "Don't worry, I'll handle this." But worry she did, all through the night and into the next morning. York spent the evening organizing his men, checking weapons, and preparing the ranch for unwelcome visitors. The easy conversation of the porch seemed a distant memory as tension filled the air. Morning came with an eerie calm. Gabrielle prepared breakfast as usual, though few had the appetite to eat. York stationed his men at strategic points around the property and asked Gabrielle to stay inside the main house. "I won't hide," she protested, loading the shotgun that normally hung above the fireplace. "This is partly my fight, too." York looked as though he wanted to argue but seemed to recognize the determination in her eyes. "Stay back, at least. I don't want you in the line of fire." "I know how to handle a gun," she reminded him. Her father had taught her that much, at least in better days. The sound of approaching riders came around noon. Gabrielle watched from the window as Harmon arrived with 8 men, all armed and looking ready for trouble. York stepped out onto the porch, his gun belt slung low but his hands deliberately away from his weapon. "That's far enough, Harmon," he called. "State your business." Harmon reined in his horse about 20 yards from the house. His men spread out slightly behind him, a clear attempt at intimidation. "My business is with you, Newcomb," Harmon replied. "You humiliated me in front of half the territory." "You did that yourself," York responded evenly. "You lost fair and square." Harmon's face darkened. "Nothing's fair when a man's reputation is at stake. I've come to set things right." "How do you propose to do that?" A slow, dangerous smile spread across Harmon's face. "I want a rematch. The quick draw we never got to finish. Winner takes all." Gabrielle stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "There's nothing to win, Mr. Harmon. The competition is over." Harmon's eyes flicked to her, narrowing with malice. "There's always something to win, girl. like that North Pasture Newcomb was so ready to wager. His gaze returned to York. "Unless you're too yellow to face me man to man." York's expression remained impassive, but Gabrielle could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have nothing to prove to you, Harmon." "Then prove it to her," Harmon taunted, nodding toward Gabrielle. "Show her you're man enough to finish what you started." "Don't listen to him," Gabrielle said quietly. "He's trying to provoke you." But she could see the calculation in York's eyes. Harmon wouldn't leave without some form of satisfaction, and if refused, he might resort to more dangerous methods. A controlled confrontation might be the safer option. "One draw," York finally said. "Just you and me. Your men stay back. If I win, you leave my property and never return. You don't speak to Miss Burrows, you don't threaten my ranch, you don't even say my name in public. We're done." "And if I win?" Harmon asked, the gleam in his eye suggesting he already had terms in mind. "If you win, you get the North Pasture," York stated. "Legal deed signed and delivered." Harmon considered this, then nodded. "Deal." He dismounted, signaling his men to stay back. "Rules." "Standard quick draw," York said, stepping off the porch. "Back to back, 10 paces, turn and fire on Jenkins' signal." He looked to his foreman, who nodded grimly. Gabrielle felt sick with fear as the two men took their positions, standing back to back in the dusty yard. This wasn't a competition anymore, this was potentially lethal. "York," she called, unable to stop herself. Both men turned to look at her. "Be careful." Something softened in York's expression as he nodded to her. Then he and Harmon stood back to back, tension radiating from both men. 10 paces, Jenkins called. "On my count. 1, 2, 3. The men began walking away from each other, boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each deliberate step. 8, 9, 10, both men turned, hands flying to their weapons. The sound of gunshots cracked through the air almost simultaneously. Gabrielle's heart stopped as she saw York stagger slightly. But it was Harmon who cried out, clutching his right arm where blood was already seeping through his sleeve. "You shot my gun arm," Harmon snarled, his weapon lying in the dirt where he dropped it. "Be thankful that's all I shot," York replied, his own gun still trained steadily on the other man. "Now get off my property." For a moment, Harmon looked like he might order his men to attack anyway. But a quick glance showed York's ranch hands all in position, weapons ready. He was outmatched and he knew it. "This isn't over, Newcomb," he spat, allowing one of his men to help him back onto his horse. "Yes, it is," York said with quiet finality. "Unless you want the sheriff involved." "I'm sure he'd be interested to hear about your attempt to claim a human being as winnings in a poker game." Harmon's face contorted with rage, but he had no counter. With a jerk of his head, he signaled his men to retreat, and the group rode away, leaving only dust and tension in their wake. As soon as they were out of sight, Gabrielle rushed to York's side. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the tear in his shirt where Harmon's bullet had grazed his side. "It's nothing," he assured her, though he winced when she touched the area gently. "Just a scratch." "Inside now," she ordered, surprising herself with her assertiveness. "That needs cleaning and bandaging." As she tended to his wound in the kitchen, a comfortable silence fell between them. His skin was warm beneath her fingers as she carefully cleaned the graze with whiskey and water. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, wrapping a clean bandage around his torso. "Risk yourself again, I mean." York watched her work, his eyes never leaving her face. "Yes, I did." "Why?" she asked, securing the bandage and finally meeting his gaze. "Because Harmon is the kind of man who doesn't stop until he's forced to," York explained. "And because—" He hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Because," she prompted, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of him thinking he had any claim on you," York admitted, his voice dropping lower. Not even a passing thought that you could ever belong to him. Gabrielle's hand stilled on the bandage. I don't belong to anyone, she said softly. No, York agreed, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. You don't. You're free, Gabrielle, completely free. The way he said it with such conviction and respect made her heart swell. In that moment, looking into his eyes, she realized something had been growing between them since that night in the saloon, something stronger and deeper than gratitude or obligation. Before she could respond, Jenkins called from outside, breaking the moment. "Riders coming, boss." "Looks like the sheriff," York sighed, reluctantly stepping back. Harmon must have gone to the law after all. The interruption was perhaps fortunate, giving Gabrielle time to collect her thoughts as York went to meet the sheriff. But the feeling that had passed between them lingered, like the warmth of a fire still felt after stepping away from the flames. Something had changed between them, and neither the arrival of the sheriff nor the complications that followed could alter that fact. The sheriff's visit brought unexpected news. Harmon hadn't come to file a complaint. Instead, he'd left town entirely, apparently heading north toward Carson City. Rumors suggested he'd been in financial trouble for months, overextending himself buying up land and cattle he couldn't properly manage. "Seems like that wound to his pride was the final straw," Sheriff Mills explained as he accepted the coffee Gabrielle offered. "His men are saying he plans to sell his holdings here and try his luck in California." "Good riddance," Jenkins muttered from the doorway. The sheriff nodded sympathetically. "Can't say I disagree. Man like that brings nothing but trouble." He turned to York. "Still, I'd watch your back for a while. Harmon doesn't strike me as the forgiving type." "I always watch my back," York assured him. "Comes with the territory." After the sheriff departed, life at the ranch gradually returned to normal, or what passed for normal. The days grew shorter as summer gave way to fall, and Gabrielle found herself settling more deeply into ranch life. She expanded her duties beyond housekeeping, helping with the horses and even joining roundups when extra hands were needed. York seemed to appreciate her initiative, and they fell into an easy working relationship that was nonetheless charged with an unspoken awareness that had begun in that moment in the kitchen. Their conversations grew longer, their glances held more meaning, and occasionally their hands would brush accidentally at first, then perhaps less accidentally as time went on. One crisp October evening, as golden light bathed the mountains, York found Gabrielle in the garden behind the main house, gathering the last of the season's vegetables before frost could claim them. "Need any help?" he asked, leaning on the fence. Gabrielle smiled up at him, brushing dirt from her hands. "I think I've got it under control, unless you're particularly fond of pulling carrots." "Can't say it's my specialty," he admitted with a smile. He seemed different today, more relaxed, almost boyish in his demeanor. "I was wondering if you might join me for a ride tomorrow. There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity piqued, Gabrielle nodded. "I'd like that." The next day dawned clear and cool, perfect riding weather. York had 2 horses saddled and waiting when Gabrielle emerged from her cabin after breakfast. He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. They rode for about an hour, following the creek that bordered York's property, until it widened into a small, pristine lake nestled among aspen trees whose leaves had turned brilliant gold. The water reflected the mountains and sky like a perfect mirror, disturbed only by the occasional jump of a fish. "It's beautiful," Gabrielle breathed as they dismounted. "I had no idea this was here." "Not many people do," York replied, leading the horses to a grassy patch where they could graze. My father brought me here when I was a boy, said it was the heart of our land, even though it's technically just outside our property line. They walked to the edge of the water, where York spread a blanket he'd brought. From his saddlebags he produced a simple picnic bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of wine. "This is quite the expedition," Gabrielle noted, settling on the blanket. "Special occasion." York arranged the food between them before answering. "In a way. It's been exactly 3 months since you came to work at the ranch." The fact that he'd kept track touched her deeply. 3 months, she repeated softly. "It feels both longer and shorter somehow." "Do you miss your old life?" he asked, pouring wine into 2 tin cups. Gabrielle considered the question seriously. "I miss who my father used to be before the gambling took hold, and I miss my mother, of course." She accepted the wine, their fingers touching briefly. "But no, I don't miss that life. I was drowning there." York nodded in understanding. "And now?" "Now I feel." She searched for the right words, like I'm finally living, building something real instead of just surviving. Something in York's expression shifted, a decision seemingly made. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. Building something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document which he handed to her. Puzzled, Gabrielle opened it and scanned the legal text, her eyes widening as she realized what she was reading. "This is a deed to a parcel of land." She looked up at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "It's 40 acres just north of the main ranch house," York explained. "Good land with water rights. It's yours." Gabrielle stared at him, speechless. "Mine, but why?" York took a deep breath, as if preparing for a speech he'd rehearsed but was still nervous about. "When I told Harmon you were free, I meant it. You don't belong to anyone, not your father, not Harmon, not me. But freedom without options isn't really freedom at all." He gestured to the deed in her hands. "This is an option. You can build on it, farm it, sell it, whatever you choose. It's yours, free and clear." Gabrielle looked down at the document, emotion welling in her throat. "I can't accept this, York. It's too much." "You can," he insisted gently. "And there's no obligation that comes with it. You can keep working at the ranch if you want, or strike out on your own. You can stay in Nevada or go east or west or wherever you please." He paused, his voice softening. "I just want you to know that your future is yours to decide." Tears pricked at Gabrielle's eyes as the full meaning of his gift sank in. No one had ever offered her such freedom, such trust in her own judgment. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. York's eyes held hers steadily. "Because in these 3 months I've come to care for you, Gabrielle, more than I thought possible." He smiled slightly. "And caring for someone means wanting their happiness, even if that happiness doesn't include you." The honesty of his words struck her deeply. This wasn't just generosity, it was love, expressed not through demands or expectations, but through the gift of choice. "What if," she began, her heart pounding, "what if my happiness does include you?" The hope that flared in his eyes made her breath catch. "Then I'd be the luckiest man in Nevada territory." Gabrielle carefully set the deed aside and moved closer to him on the blanket. "I've never met anyone like you, York Newcomb. Most men would have used saving me from Harmon as leverage, expecting gratitude or more." She reached out, tentatively touching his face. "But you've only ever given me choices. Freedom." York turned his face slightly to press a kiss to her palm. "That's what love should be. Not ownership, but partnership. Choice, not obligation." "Is that what this is?" she asked softly. "Love?" Instead of answering directly, York leaned forward, pausing just before his lips met hers. "May I?" The question, so simple yet so profound in its respect for her autonomy, confirmed what she already knew. This was a man unlike any other, one who understood that true love couldn't exist without true freedom. "Yes," she whispered, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a promise exchanged without words. When they drew apart, the look they shared contained all the conversations they'd had and all the ones yet to come. "I think," Gabrielle said, her voice stronger now, "that I'll keep the land. And I'll stay at the ranch, but not as your housekeeper." York's eyebrows rose slightly. "What did you have in mind, partner?" she replied simply. "In whatever capacity you'll have me." The smile that spread across York's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I can think of one particular partnership I'd like to propose," he said, taking her hand in his. "Though perhaps it's too soon." "Ask me," Gabrielle encouraged, her heart feeling fuller than she'd ever thought possible. "Gabrielle Burrows," York said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Would you consider becoming my wife? Not today or tomorrow, but when you're ready, if you're ever ready." The fact that he included that qualifier, that even in a proposal he gave her space to choose, confirmed everything she felt for him. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I would, and I don't need time to consider it." Joy transformed his features as he pulled her close for another kiss, this one deeper and filled with promise. When they finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, the world around them seemed more vibrant somehow, the golden leaves brighter, the mountain air sweeter. "What about the property you've given me?" Gabrielle asked, suddenly practical. "If we marry, wouldn't it just become yours again under the law?" York shook his head. "Not if we draw up the right papers. I've already spoken to a lawyer in town. The land stays yours, marriage or no." "That's not negotiable." Once again, his care for her independence moved her deeply. "You've thought of everything." "I've tried," he admitted. "I want to do this right, Gabrielle. I want us to build something together that's based on respect, not ownership." As they sat by the lake, planning their future with the mountains as witness, Gabrielle reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. Her father's terrible wager, the lowest point of her life, had somehow led to this moment of perfect happiness. "You know," she said, nestling against York's side as they watched the sunset paint the water in crimson and gold, "when you faced down Harmon after winning that competition and told me I was free, I had no idea what that really meant until now." York's arm tightened around her. "What does it mean to you?" Gabrielle looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything to save her and then risked his heart by loving her without conditions. "It means having the power to choose," she said. "And I choose you, York Newcomb. Every day I choose you." As their lips met again, sealing that promise beneath the vast Nevada sky, Gabrielle knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just freedom, but home. Spring came to Nevada with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. The wedding was set for early May, when the mountains would still be capped with snow, but the valley would be warm and green. In the months following their engagement, Gabrielle had grown into her role as more than just York's future wife. She had taken charge of expanding the ranch's operations, suggesting they add sheep to their cattle business, a controversial move in cattle country, but one that York supported after she presented a compelling case for the economic benefits. She had also begun building a small house on her 40 acres, not to live apart from York, but to create a school for the children of nearby ranchers and farmers who had limited educational opportunities. Having discovered a passion for teaching during the winter when she'd helped the ranch hands improve their reading skills, Gabrielle had found a purpose beyond what she'd ever imagined for herself. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect. Gabrielle stood in her cabin, now transformed with flowers and ribbons, as Martha Jenkins, the blacksmith's wife, helped her dress. "You look beautiful, my dear," Martha said, fastening the last button on Gabrielle's gown, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. "York won't know what hit him." Gabrielle smiled, touching the silver pendant that still hung around her neck, now complemented by a delicate bracelet of silver and turquoise, a gift from York's mother who had arrived from St. Louis a week earlier for the wedding. "I can hardly believe this is happening," Gabrielle admitted. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up and find myself back in that saloon, watching my father gamble away our lives." Martha squeezed her shoulders gently. "That's all in the past now. You've built something wonderful here, both of you have." A knock at the door interrupted them. To Gabrielle's surprise, it was Sheriff Mills, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Miss Burrows," he said, removing his hat, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Sheriff," Gabrielle assured him. "Is everything all right?" The sheriff nodded, then hesitated. "I have a visitor for you, someone who's come a long way. I told him it was entirely up to you whether you wanted to see him today." A cold feeling settled in Gabrielle's stomach. "My father," Sheriff Mills nodded. "He's been in Carson City these past months. Says he's sober now. Has been for 3 months." Gabrielle's emotions warred within her: anger, hurt, a daughter's instinctive love, and the fear of having her perfect day spoiled by painful memories. "What does he want?" she asked cautiously. "To apologize," the sheriff replied. "And if you're willing to attend the wedding, though he understands if you refuse." Martha touched Gabrielle's arm gently. "It's your choice, dear. Don't feel pressured either way." Gabrielle took a deep breath, thinking of all that had happened since that terrible night in the saloon. She thought of York, of his belief in freedom and choice, of the second chances she'd been given. "I'll see him," she decided. "Just for a few minutes." Sheriff Mills nodded and stepped outside, returning moments later with William Burrows. Gabrielle barely recognized her father. Gone was the bleary-eyed, disheveled gambler who had wagered her future on a hand of cards. In his place stood a thinner, sober man, his face lined with regret and his eyes clear for the first time in years. "Gabby," he said, his voice catching, "you look just like your mother." Martha discreetly slipped outside, leaving father and daughter alone. "What are you doing here, Papa?" Gabrielle asked, keeping her voice steady. William twisted his hat in his hands. "I came to say I'm sorry, though I know that's not enough, could never be enough for what I did to you." When Gabrielle didn't respond, he continued, the words tumbling out as if he feared not getting another chance to say them. "After you left, I hit rock bottom. Lost everything, ended up in jail for a while after a bar fight. When I got out, I realized I didn't want to die the way I was living." He swallowed hard. "I found work in Carson City loading freight, joined a temperance meeting, haven't touched a drop in 3 months. "That's good," Gabrielle said cautiously. "I'm glad for you." William nodded, seemingly encouraged by her response. "I don't expect forgiveness, Gabby. What I did was unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that I understand that now, and I'm trying to be better." Something in his sincerity touched Gabrielle's heart. She had spent months putting the past behind her, building a new life with York. Perhaps part of that process was finding a way to make peace with the man her father had been and acknowledging the man he was trying to become. "I appreciate you coming," she said finally. "It couldn't have been easy." "Easiest hard thing I've ever done," William replied with a ghost of a smile. "I've been reading about your school in the newspaper and about the sheep ranch. You've made something of yourself, Gabby, despite me, not because of me." "I had help," she acknowledged, thinking of York. William nodded. "Newcomb's a good man. I knew his father, you know, cut from the same cloth." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, William cleared his throat. "I should go. I didn't come to disrupt your day, just to wish you happiness." As he turned to leave, Gabrielle felt something shift within her. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take time if it ever came, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Papa," she called. He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. "Would you like to stay for the wedding?" The emotion that crossed William's face was almost painful to witness. "Are you sure?" Gabrielle nodded. "I'm sure," but she held up a hand as he stepped toward her. "This doesn't mean everything is fixed between us. That will take time if it happens at all." "I understand," he said solemnly. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give, Gabby, and ask for nothing more." As William left to find a seat among the guests already gathering in the ranch yard, Gabrielle turned back to the mirror. The woman who gazed back at her seemed older somehow, wiser perhaps, than she had been just minutes before. A soft knock at the door announced York's mother, Alina, who entered with a bouquet of wildflowers and sage. "These are for you, my dear," she said, handing Gabrielle the fragrant arrangement. "Are you ready? Everyone's waiting." Gabrielle took a deep breath, then nodded. "I'm ready." The ceremony took place beneath an arch of aspen branches and spring flowers, with the mountains providing a majestic backdrop. Sheriff Mills, who was also a justice of the peace, officiated. York stood waiting, looking more handsome than Gabrielle had ever seen him in a new black suit, his dark hair tamed for the occasion. When their eyes met as she walked toward him on Sheriff Mills' arm, a role he had graciously accepted when asked, the love she saw there nearly overwhelmed her. This was a man who had risked everything for her when she was a stranger, who had given her freedom when others would have demanded servitude, who had offered partnership when others would have insisted on ownership. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of respect and partnership alongside the traditional pledges of love and fidelity. When York slipped the ring, a band of gold with tiny diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother, onto her finger, Gabrielle felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Nevada," Sheriff Mills announced, beaming, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The cheer that went up from the assembled guests as York and Gabrielle sealed their union with a kiss seemed to echo off the mountains themselves. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Gabrielle caught sight of her father standing at the back of the gathering, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and more laughter than the ranch had likely ever known. As twilight descended, York led Gabrielle away from the festivities to the porch of what was now their home. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly, leaning back against him as they watched the first stars appear. "I saw you speaking with your father earlier," York noted. "Was that all right?" Gabrielle nodded slowly. "It was a beginning. He's trying to change. I don't know if he'll succeed, but I think I'm ready to let him try." York pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm proud of you, you know. Not many would have the strength to offer that chance." "I had a good example," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Someone who believes in second chances. In freedom." His smile was tender as he traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips. "Speaking of freedom," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "Mrs. Newcomb, you are free to choose where we spend the rest of this evening." "The celebration out there." He nodded toward the lantern-lit yard where music and laughter continued. "Or perhaps somewhere more private." The warmth in his eyes sent a shiver of anticipation through Gabrielle. "I believe," she said, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his, "that I've made quite enough public appearances for one day." The bedroom they now shared had been transformed by Alina and Martha's careful touches: fresh linens, flowers on the dresser, candles waiting to be lit. As York closed the door behind them, the sounds of the celebration faded to a distant murmur. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small package from the dresser drawer. "A wedding gift." Gabrielle unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of mountains and stars. "Open it," York encouraged. Inside, on the first page, he had written, "For Gabrielle Newcomb, to record the story that begins today." A story of freedom, of partnership, and of love. Tears pricked at Gabrielle's eyes as she closed the journal and held it to her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." York gathered her close, his kiss deeper now, filled with promise. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips, "for choosing me." As night fell completely over the Nevada mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds surrendered to the love they had built, a love founded on respect, strengthened by challenge, and characterized above all by the freedom to choose each other every day, for all the days to come. 5 years later, Gabrielle stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as York taught their 3-year-old son, William, to sit on his first pony. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the ranch yard, bringing a smile to Gabrielle's face despite her exhaustion. At her breast, 2-month-old Alina nursed contentedly, her tiny hand wrapped around Gabrielle's finger. The baby was named for York's mother, who had passed peacefully the previous winter after moving to the ranch permanently 3 years earlier. "Mama, look," William called excitedly as the pony took a few steps with York holding both child and reins securely. "I'm riding." "I see you, sweetheart," Gabrielle called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Pride swelled in her chest as she watched her family. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations, with the controversial addition of sheep proving particularly profitable. The school she had built on her 40 acres now served 15 children from surrounding properties, with Martha Jenkins helping as an assistant teacher 3 days a week. Even more surprising was the small trading post William Burrows now operated on the edge of their property. After attending the wedding, her father had returned to Carson City to complete his freight contract, then had come back to Reno sober and seeking a fresh start. York, in an act of generosity that still humbled Gabrielle, had offered him a small parcel of land and a loan to build the store. Over the past 5 years, William had repaid both the loan and his daughter's cautious trust. He remained sober, became a doting grandfather to young William, and had gradually rebuilt his relationship with Gabrielle. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had healed enough to allow for a new kind of family bond. As if summoned by her thoughts, William appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a package. "Mail came," he announced, climbing the porch steps, "including something that looks official for you." He handed Gabrielle an envelope bearing the territorial seal. "Can you take Alina for a moment?" she asked, shifting the now sleeping baby into her grandfather's eager arms. William cradled his granddaughter with practiced ease, his weathered face softening as he gazed down at her. "She looks more like your mother every day," he remarked quietly. Gabrielle smiled in agreement as she opened the envelope. Her eyes widened as she scanned its contents. "What is it?" William asked, noting her expression. "It's from the Territorial Education Board," Gabrielle explained, excitement building in her voice. "They've approved my proposal for funding. Our school is going to become one of the first officially recognized educational institutions in the county." William's face lit up with pride. "That's wonderful news, Gabby. You've worked so hard for this." Gabrielle reread the letter, hardly able to believe it was real. The grant would allow her to expand the school, hire another teacher, and provide books and supplies for more students. "I need to tell York," she said, tucking the letter safely back into its envelope. As if on cue, York appeared, carrying a tired but happy William on his shoulders. "Tell me what?" he asked, setting their son down to run to his grandfather. Gabrielle handed him the letter, watching as the same pride and joy she felt reflected on his face as he read. "They approved it," he said, looking up with a broad smile. "I knew they would." He gathered her into an embrace, mindful of Alina still sleeping in William's arms. "You've done something remarkable, Gabrielle, something that will change lives for generations." "We've done something remarkable," she corrected, leaning into his solid warmth. "All of this, the ranch, the school, our family, we've built it together." Later that evening, after the children were asleep and William had returned to his quarters above the trading post, York and Gabrielle sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge above the mountains they both loved. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Gabrielle asked softly, her head resting on York's shoulder. "If my father hadn't made that terrible wager, if you hadn't been in the saloon that night—" York considered this, his arm tightening slightly around her. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Some things are just meant to be." Gabrielle smiled at his uncharacteristic romanticism. "Even so, I'm grateful for how it happened, as strange as that sounds. That moment when you faced down Harmon and told me I was free. It changed everything for me." "For me too," York admitted, "though I didn't realize then how completely you would change my life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the creaking of the swing and the distant sounds of night creatures creating a peaceful symphony around them. "I've been thinking," York said eventually, "about expanding again." Gabrielle looked up at him curiously. "The ranch? Or the school?" "Both, actually. Jenkins mentioned the old Willoughby place might be for sale soon. It borders our east pasture, would be perfect for more grazing." "And the school?" Gabrielle prompted. York's smile turned slightly mischievous. "Well, that might need to expand too in a few years, to accommodate more Newcombs." It took Gabrielle a moment to understand his meaning. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Mr. Newcomb?" "I'm merely saying," he replied, his eyes twinkling, "that William and Alina might benefit from another sibling or two, if you were amenable to the idea." Gabrielle pretended to consider this seriously. "I suppose the house is large enough, and you have proven to be a reasonably competent father." "Reasonably competent," York laughed, pulling her closer. "Such high praise." "Well," Gabrielle conceded, smiling up at him, "perhaps more than merely competent." His kiss was as thrilling now as it had been on their wedding day, filled with the same tenderness, but deepened by years of shared joy and challenge. When they finally drew apart, Gabrielle reached up to touch the silver pendant that still hung around her neck, the token he had given her on the day he fought to win her freedom. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when you gave me this for luck, I never imagined it would bring me so much happiness." York covered her hand with his own where it rested over the pendant. "It wasn't luck, Gabrielle, it was you, your strength, your courage, your heart. All I did was recognize what was already there." As the moon rose over the mountains that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family, Gabrielle Newcomb reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. From the desperate daughter of a gambling man to a respected teacher, beloved wife, and mother, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined that fateful night in Reno. And through it all, the greatest gift had been the one York had given her from the beginning, the freedom to choose her own destiny, and the love that made that choice simple. "I love you," she whispered, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you," York replied, his voice carrying the certainty of a vow renewed each day. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Under the vast Nevada sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, Gabrielle knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, free, loved, and home.